I didn't flinch when the sirens pulled up. Red and blue lights spilled across my front porch like water breaking a levee. I was sitting there in my robe legs, crossed cigarette balanced between two fingers like it was 1982, and I still had a reason to care how I looked. One of the paramedics stepped onto the curb, squinting toward me with this unsure look like he didn't know if I was a witness, a neighbor, or part of the mess inside the motel 3 blocks down, the motel they'd come from. Room 9. I knew it before anyone said a word. I heard the yelling first, not from my porch from the phone call before. The dispatcher had put me on hold by mistake, didn't realize I was still on the line. Her voice was shaking. It's 2 individuals, stuck together, she whispered. Yeah, like, literally. A pause. Then laughter muffled but real. She hadn't muted herself fast enough. I remember looking down at my coffee and thinking, it worked. By the time the cops pulled up to that motel, half the block had wandered out in house shoes and cell phones, all rubbernecking toward the parking lot. I sat on my swing, quiet, calm. I could almost hear the sizzle of the glue heating against their bodies, their sweat turning it tacky. She screamed first, apparently. He followed a few seconds later. They tried pulling apart. That was their first mistake. It was a clear bottle. Looked like the same stuff they always kept on the bedside table. A travel-sized silicone lube. Unassuming. Innocent. I'd replaced it 3 days earlier with a thick layer of adhesive, the kind used in industrial furniture repair. Fast-acting, waterproof, skin bonding. You could get it online if you knew what to search for, and I knew. I had time. The motel manager said he thought it was a prank. Until the woman, half-naked, hysterical, came running into the lobby, dragging my husband behind her, both of them shrieking and tangled and very much fused at the hips. The old man at the desk nearly fainted. It took them 90 minutes to separate them. Paramedics, 2 firefighters, and a saw. The news crew never made it in time, thank God. But the photos leaked. Someone at the station sold them. Not that it mattered, the story was already everywhere. Small towns don't forget. I sat outside through it all. The air smelled like burnt hair and cherry blossoms. I watched a neighbor's cat crawl beneath my car and disappear. I took a drag, then another. And I thought about how easy it had been, how quiet the whole thing had become once I'd decided to stop loving him. Someone walked up to me. I think it was Officer Delaney, the one who came out last year when our mailbox got smashed by teens. He tipped his hat and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry for your, the situation must be embarrassing." I looked up, met his eyes, held them steady. "No," I said. "Not for me," he nodded, unsure what to say after that. The air was humid. The sky had that dull violet color it gets before a thunderstorm. I heard her crying, that woman, all the way down the block, wailing like something had been stolen from her. I wondered what she thought she'd earned, what either of them thought they deserved. When I met Gerald, that's my husband, he was 26, tan from summers on the water, with a laugh that came from deep in his chest. He said I was the smartest woman he'd ever met. Said he'd never cheat like his father. Said he wanted to grow old beside me. I was 23 and believed him. Now I was 61 and watching EMTs carry him out the back of a motel, pants around his ankles, groaning like a shot deer. That, I suppose, was the end of the story. But it's not where it started. Not for me. Because there's something people never tell you about betrayal. Something you don't understand until you're standing ankle deep in it. It's slow. It's not always a slap or a scream or a lipstick on the collar. Sometimes it's a drawer that closes too fast, a new ringtone he doesn't want you to hear, or a pause the kind that lives in his breath when you ask, "Are you working late again tonight?" The first time I suspected, I said nothing. The second time I swallowed it. The third time I started watching. I watched everything, and what I found was something colder than infidelity. It was something emptier. He had already left me long before the motel, long before the girl, long before the glue. That's why I never yelled, why I didn't cry, why I never told him I knew. I just waited. I waited for the pattern, for the weekend trip he always took when he claimed he was doing Rotary Club outreach in Hartford. I packed his bag, laid his cologne on the counter, even tucked a granola bar in the side pocket like I used to when we were first married and I worried about him eating. Then I placed the bottle. That night I slept on his side of the bed. I didn't cry. The next morning I made eggs, paid bills, watered my dahlias. I had no guilt, only this strange, rising calm, the kind I hadn't felt in years, like walking out into the sun after a long, windowless winter. And now here they were, two people who thought they could take something from me and walk away untouched. They weren't untouched anymore, and I wasn't invisible anymore. People say revenge is messy. But mine was clean, precise, surgical. All it took was a bottle and patience. The funny thing about betrayal is how ordinary it looks from the outside. Nobody walks into the grocery store and sees a woman picking up frozen peas and thinks her husband is screwing someone else right now. But we exist. Women like me, in the cereal aisle, behind steering wheels, at backyard birthday parties holding someone else's grandchild. We exist in silence, in habit, in resignation. That's where I lived for years, in the soft, numbing fog of just going along with it. I met Gerald in 1986 at a 4th of July barbecue. He was loud, handsome, barefoot, and drinking beer out of a red Solo cup. I was not. I was the woman in the linen dress offering to help the host clean up the watermelon rinds. He came up behind me while I was rinsing my hands in the kitchen sink and said, "You're the only woman here who looks like she actually reads books." I laughed. He kissed me by the fireworks. We were married 11 months later. Back then, he was a contractor with a small team, a busted-up van, and big ideas about real estate. I was a probation officer working cases that broke my heart every other Tuesday. My salary paid our rent. His went into a savings account marked business. I cooked dinner every night, packed lunches, paid his dental bills, took notes on his early investor meetings. I remember ironing his shirts for a pitch meeting once and thinking, this is what love looks like. Sacrifice you're not even asked to make. But things change. Slowly, like a pond drying out. We couldn't have children. I miscarried twice, once at 8 weeks, once at 13. The second time, he didn't come to the hospital. Said he was halfway to a job site and it had cost too much to turn around. I said nothing. We never talked about it again. I used to think silence was strength. That if I didn't cry, if I didn't scream, if I didn't ask for more than he could give, I was being noble. But noble gets you nowhere. It gets you dishes in the sink and birthdays forgotten, and a man who looks at his phone during dinner like you're already dead. I stayed anyway. Not because I loved him not by then, but because I had convinced myself that leaving at 60 would be sadder than staying. That being alone at my age was more shameful than being neglected in private. And then came the thong. I found it while vacuuming the car. It wasn't even buried, Just there. Pale pink, delicate. Brand tag still attached, airy size small. I held it between 2 fingers like it was a thing from another world. I didn't scream, didn't throw it, just folded it gently like a handkerchief and placed it in the kitchen drawer next to the twist ties. That was the first time I stopped believing him. The second time was his credit card statement 2 charges from Mason Pines Lodge. Romantic little spot an hour away. B&B. I'd always wanted to go. He said it was for a drywall expo. The third time I followed him. I rented a car, left early, parked across the street. Watched him take her hand as they walked into room 9 like it was their honeymoon. She looked young, not a teenager, but maybe 35. Long legs, ponytail, tight jeans. I didn't hate her. I just wondered what he'd promised her. Wondered if she was as lonely as I had been once. Maybe she thought she was the lucky one. The thing about infidelity is it's not about sex. It's about being erased. About someone deciding you're no longer worth seeing, worth choosing. That night I went home and stood in our bedroom, not crying, not shaking, just standing and stared at his side of the bed. I opened his drawer, pulled out the travel bag he always kept ready, the one he thought I didn't know about. Inside toothbrush, aftershave gum, and that bottle of lube. I went online, found a glue forum. Yes, they exist. Hobbyists, repair folks, even pranksters. I learned about viscosity surface bonding drying times. Took me 3 clicks to find what I needed. Overnight shipping. When it arrived, I tested it on my own skin. A drop between 2 fingers. 30 seconds later, I couldn't pull them apart without peeling skin. I remember whispering to myself, okay. He was gone the next weekend. Rotary Club again. Kissed my cheek on the way out, told me not to wait up. I watched from the window as he drove off, one hand already on his phone. Probably texting her. Probably lying. I poured the contents of the lube down the toilet, washed the bottle, dried it, filled it halfway with glue, and resealed it carefully, left it exactly where it had been. There's a kind of silence that grows inside you when you stop expecting anyone to notice you. It's not pain. It's not bitterness. It's this still echoing room in your chest where the version of you who used to dream goes to die. That weekend, I buried her for good, and I began something new. I did not wait for an apology. I did not wait to be noticed. I simply set the match down and let them walk into the fire hand in hand. People think rage has to be loud, but mine was quiet, cold, a room with all the windows shut tight. I used to cook dinner for him every night, even when I was tired, even when my feet ached from standing too long, even when he didn't come home until 99 euro and barely looked up from his phone. It became a ritual that didn't belong to us anymore, more like a performance I couldn't stop giving. I'd plate his food carefully, always hot, always seasoned. He'd say thanks sometimes. Most nights he didn't. And I'd sit there across the table pretending to eat, watching steam curl off a plate he never touched. It was during one of those nights 2 weeks before the motel that I realized I didn't know what his laugh sounded like anymore. Not the one he used in front of clients or neighbors or the waitress who always bent too far over at the Rusty Fork. I mean his laugh. The real one. The one that made his shoulders shake when we used to lie in bed talking about nothing. I tried to remember the last time I'd heard it. I couldn't. And that terrified me more than the thong, more than the lies, more than her. It wasn't just that I'd lost him. I'd lost the version of myself that used to matter to him. The day after I planted the bottle in his bag, I went to our closet and pulled down a box I hadn't touched in 15 years. Inside was a dusty portfolio charcoal sketches from my first year of community college back when I wanted to be an art therapist. I'd forgotten how good some of them were. Not brilliant, not professional, but tender, alive. I sat on the edge of our bed, flipping through them while the sun lit the carpet, and I realized something else. He had never once asked to see them. Not once. It made me feel stupid, small, like a ghost in my own house, clinging to the last of something that had never really belonged to me. That night I made dinner. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. He called and said he was grabbing a bite with Mike, one of those lies that had become muscle memory for him. I told him I'd wait up. He didn't respond. I ate alone. Again. One plate warm, one cold. That cold plate broke something in me. Not in a loud cinematic way, just quietly. Like a final stitch popping open after years of strain. I washed the dishes, dried the counter, and placed his untouched plate in the fridge like always. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the sound of nothing that had become my whole life. He came home past midnight, didn't notice I was awake, didn't kiss me goodnight, and I thought, you don't get to do this to someone and still expect their silence. But that was always the deal, wasn't it? That I'd bear it quietly, that I'd keep the peace, keep the house clean, keep the routine, keep the lie. Even my therapist, the one I saw back in 2004 after the second miscarriage, told me I was remarkably self-regulated. I took that as a compliment. Now I wonder if it was a warning. You can only hold your breath for so long before you forget how to breathe. The glue was already in his bag by then, sitting quietly in the side pocket waiting for him to open it, waiting for her. But the strange thing was, even knowing what I'd done, I didn't feel wicked, or brave, or righteous. I felt still, like a lake after a storm. No wind, no ripples, just the quiet truth of what had to be done. I never meant to destroy him. I just wanted him to feel what I had felt. To be frozen in place, unable to escape the thing he chose, the thing he thought he could hide. I wanted him to feel the permanence of it, the way betrayal sticks, the way humiliation settles into your skin and stays. I started walking in the evenings again, something I hadn't done in years. Just small loops around the block, then a little farther each night. One evening, I passed the old Kinsley house, the one with the peeling shutters and overgrown hydrangeas, and for the first time I noticed the sunset behind it. Like really noticed it. The clouds were soft, like peach slices. The sky glowed orange and lavender, and I thought, this is mine. This peace. This moment. It's mine. Gerald didn't call from the motel that weekend. No texts, no check-in. He was careful like that. Always had been. He probably thought I was home watching cable folding laundry, maybe worrying about what to cook when he got back. He never imagined I'd found her name, that I'd seen her tiny heart tattoo on her hip through a motel window, that I knew where they liked to eat afterward. Or that I'd stood on the curb close enough to hear him laugh the way he used to, the way I hadn't heard in years. It was the laugh that hurt the most, not because he gave it to her, but because it meant it had still been in him all along. He'd just stopped sharing it with me, so I took something back. Not his money, not his house, not even his reputation. Just a moment. A singular, unforgettable moment of truth. One they couldn't wiggle out of. One they'd have to explain to a dozen strangers with flashlights and gloves and radios crackling with code words for disaster. The night before the glue took hold, I slept for 8 full hours. No dreams, no tossing, just sleep. Like my body finally believed it was safe again. In the morning, I made pancakes for one, and I smiled. Not because he was gone, but because I was coming back. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes after you make a decision like that. Not peace exactly, more like the hush before a thunderstorm, when the sky holds its breath and every bird disappears. That's what the hours felt like after I sent him off with the bottle. The tension wasn't in my chest. It was in the air itself, humming through the walls of the house. I didn't tell a soul. Not my sister, not the girls in my book club, not the old friend from Florida I sometimes called after a glass of wine. What I'd done was mine, and I wanted to keep it that way. There was something sacred in the silence, like closing a book you'd finally finished and knowing no one else would ever understand what it meant to you. Still, I wasn't ready for how public it would become. I found out through a friend of all things. Marcy Breen. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she made that snide remark about my gray roots at Cheryl's retirement party, but that morning she called me out of the blue, her voice nearly breathless. "Oh my God, Eleanor, are you okay?" I was sitting on the porch with my coffee, the cup warm between my palms. I hadn't turned on the news. I hadn't checked my phone. "I'm fine," I said slowly. "Why?" There was a beat of silence, then a soft gasp. "You haven't heard?" I didn't answer. "Well, there's something going around. Facebook mostly. A motel downtown police got called in. A couple got stuck. Like, glued together." Her voice cracked like she was trying not to laugh. "People are saying it was your Gerald." I closed my eyes. What people, I asked. Everyone. Girl at the salon said he was screaming her name in the parking lot. And well, the guy has a very distinct tattoo, you know I did. It was a tribal thing he got in '99 after a tequila-soaked weekend in Arizona with his friend Troy. He said it represented protection and endurance. I said it looked like a fancy horseshoe. We hadn't laughed about that in years. They're at the hospital now. Marcy continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You should be ready, hon. It's all over town." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still for a long time. Not with guilt. Not with panic. Just stillness. Like I had become part of the furniture. It was all happening exactly as I knew it would, and yet hearing someone else speak the words made it real in a way I hadn't expected. He was glued to her, trapped, naked, public, exposed. And now, so was I. By noon, the porch was no longer mine. Reporters didn't come to the house, but the whispers did. A woman jogged by twice slower than usual. The mailman barely made eye contact. The wind carried the sound of 2 teenage girls giggling on bicycles as they passed. The world had shifted just a notch, just enough to feel it, and I wasn't sure which direction I was standing in anymore. I went inside, closed the curtains, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at my own reflection in the microwave door. I didn't look evil. I didn't look powerful. I looked like a woman who had spent 34 years in a house that never said thank you. That evening I drove to the store, walked every aisle, bought lavender soap, a frozen shepherd's pie, and 2 bulbs of garlic. I wanted to see if people would stare. Some did. Most didn't. That was almost worse, because it meant I could disappear again if I wasn't careful. When I got home, the message light was blinking on the landline. 3 calls. 1 from my sister, 1 from his attorney, and 1 from him. The attorney's voice was cold-clipped. We'll be handling all statements moving forward. My client requests privacy during this deeply personal and embarrassing matter. Embarrassing. That was the word they used. Not deceitful, not humiliating, not vile, just embarrassing. His call came last. Ellie. A pause. A breath. I don't know if you know what happened. I need you to believe that I didn't mean for any of this. It was an accident. Jesus, it was an accident. Another pause. I can't talk long. They're saying there might be nerve damage. She's not talking to me. The press found out. Can you please call me? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I deleted the message. That night, I walked into the bedroom, stripped the sheets from our bed, and tossed them into the wash. As they spun in the machine, I sat on the laundry room floor, knees tucked to my chest, listening to the water rush and turn. I wasn't crying, but there was something heavier than crying inside me. Something older, like standing in a cave and hearing your own breath echo. The next morning, I went to the motel. I parked across the street. Room 9's curtains were drawn police tape fluttering in the wind like party streamers left too long after a birthday. I didn't get out of the car, just sat there watching the sun rise over the roofline, bathing the shingles in a soft golden light. There had been love once. I truly believed that. There had been evenings when we held hands in the grocery store, nights when he brought me soup during flu season, days we built a life together, brick by invisible brick. But love doesn't rot all at once. It dissolves. It wears out at the elbows, frays around the edges. And then one day you wake up and realize the man who said forever is now covered in someone else's sweat, screaming your name from the back of a motel. I didn't cry for him, but I cried for her. For the version of myself I had once been, the girl who would have done anything to keep a man. The woman who measured her worth by his approval, who thought being quiet made her wise. She had died long ago. And this was the funeral I never got to have. They discharged him 4 days later. Gerald came home in a county van because none of his friends would pick him up. He stood at the end of our driveway like a man who wasn't sure if the house in front of him still recognized his shape. His shirt was wrinkled one side untucked. A bandage wrapped around his hip in a way that made him walk like he was afraid of tearing open. He held a paper bag from the hospital pharmacy. I remember thinking how small he looked, not physically, but shrunk. Like a man who had once filled a room just by clearing his throat, now reduced to a long shadow and a bad limp. I didn't open the door. He let himself in with his key. I heard it, that familiar turn of the lock I'd once found comforting. Now it sounded like a mistake being repeated. The door creaked open, closed again. Ellie. His voice cracked like a teenager's. I didn't know if I should come home or not. I didn't answer right away. I was in the kitchen wiping down a spotless counter, my back to the door. He stepped into the doorway like someone entering a church he'd long abandoned. I thought maybe we could talk. I turned then. Not fast. Not angry. Just slowly enough that he saw my face before I said a word. I think you should go to your sister's, I said. The silence that followed felt biblical. He blinked like he hadn't heard me right. Ellie, we've been through too much. Please? No, Gerald, I said, setting down the towel. We haven't. That's the thing. I've been through it. You just left me to. His jaw worked, searching for words. But the man who used to win every argument with charm and distraction had finally run out of both. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I believe you." That stopped him. He looked at me like that was supposed to fix something. Like a confession spoken aloud could unrot the wood. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I didn't mean to get caught," I offered. He flinched. "To hurt you. You hurt me a long time ago." This, I gestured between us. "This is just the cleanup." He sat down at the dining table without asking. A habit of his. Like this was still his home. Still his place to collapse into. "People are calling it the Motel 9 incident." He gave a half laugh that wilted at the edges. "They keep tagging the business on Yelp." I stared at him. They said I might have some scarring. Nothing serious. Some dermal tearing, nerve damage. But I should be fine. I nodded. "Good." He looked up then. Really looked. Like he expected to see my eyes soften. "I think we can come back from this." And for a moment, one horrible, pity-heavy moment, I almost laughed. "You think I said softly that I want to come back from this?" He straightened his mouth, twitching like a man trying to keep the illusion alive. "We've had rough years, sure. But what we built, Ellie, we didn't build anything I cut in. I built it. You furnished it. And then you brought someone else inside when it stopped feeling new." His eyes filled with tears. Real ones. It didn't move me. "Do you love her?" I asked. He hesitated. "No," he said finally. "It wasn't about that." Then what was it about? He didn't answer. And that told me everything. He stood, walked toward the hall. I followed him with my eyes, but didn't move. He stopped at the bedroom door, the one that still had our initials etched into the frame. From that time we painted the walls sky blue and got tipsy on boxed wine. He touched the doorknob. I said, "Don't." His hand dropped. He turned every inch of him sagging under the weight of being seen. Really seen. "I'll go to Judy's," he said. Will you call me?" I looked at him. Why, his face broke. Not from anger, not from guilt, from realization. Because that's when it hit him. Really hit him that the woman standing in front of him wasn't waiting anymore. Wasn't weeping. Wasn't invested in the next chapter that starred him. "I don't think I know you anymore," he said. I gave the faintest smile. "That's the first honest thing you've said in years." He left that night with the pharmacy bag, his car keys, and the quietest goodbye I've ever heard. I sat on the porch after, listened to the crickets, the whisper of wind through the arbor vitae. In the distance, the clink of someone else's dinner plates being washed. And in that stillness, I remembered who I was before him. Before betrayal. Before thongs in the car and motel rooms and quiet sabotage. I was a woman who wanted to make art, who knew how to sharpen her own pencils, who read entire novels in one sitting and wept without shame at the endings. I was a woman who kept basil growing in the windowsill and believed in making things bloom even when the soil was dry. I didn't need a man to reclaim that. I just needed an ending. And now I had one. Not poetic, not triumphant, but final. And in that finality, I felt something I hadn't in years. Room. Room to breathe. Room to be. Room to live the next part of my life as someone unburdened by silence. It's strange the way a house changes after someone leaves it. Not just the emptiness, but the way it exhales, like it had been holding its breath for too long. The air felt clear the morning after he left. I opened the windows for the first time in weeks. Let the September breeze roll through the kitchen, through the hallway, lifting the curtains like soft hands. The bed looked smaller without him, the closet quieter. His toothbrush still sat in the holder untouched. I left it there for 3 days, not out of sentiment, but as a kind of test to see if its absence would ache more than its presence. It didn't. I boxed it up with the rest of his things, belts, cufflinks, cologne I'd bought him last Christmas. It was like packing up a stranger's leftovers. The divorce started quietly. I didn't fight him. I didn't want the house. I didn't want his pension. I didn't want anything that had his name sewn into it. Let him keep the porch swing and the TV and the wine glasses we never used. I asked for one thing, my name back. He offered a settlement. His attorney said it was generous considering the public nature of the incident. Public nature. That's what they were calling it now. Not betrayal, not violation, just a spectacle. Something people whispered about while pushing carts through the frozen food section. I remember the look on the notary's face when she read through the agreement. She recognized the names. Everyone did. But she didn't say a word, just handed me the pen and pointed to the signature line. As I signed, I felt my hand stop shaking for the first time in months. Not because it was over, but because I had chosen for it to be. The day he came to collect his things, I wasn't home. I left the key in the mailbox and a note on the counter. The silence isn't anger. It's freedom. E. He never responded. And that too felt like closure. Afterward, I moved into a small craftsman bungalow about an hour north. 1 story, modest, with a garden in back, and just enough space to stretch without echo. The kind of place that doesn't expect anything from you except a light touch on the doorknob and a willingness to be alone with yourself. The first week there, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of how quiet it was. No footsteps, no heavy sighs, no drawers slamming after a long day, just the creak of floorboards adjusting to my weight, and the occasional sound of deer moving through the backyard in the dark. I started sketching again. Not for anyone, just for me. Charcoal mostly. Hands, faces, the outline of a woman standing at a window, her back to the world. I took long walks through the neighborhood, learned the names of the trees, again red maple, honey locust, crepe myrtle. There was something reverent about it, like introducing myself to the earth after years of looking down. Some people stared. A few whispered. I was still that woman from the motel story, but I didn't flinch. I didn't rush. I let them look. Because the truth is, there's power in being seen, fully seen, and choosing not to shrink. One afternoon, a teenage girl knocked on my door, said she lived 3 houses down, asked if I was the lady who glued the cheater. I raised an eyebrow. She flushed. I mean, that's just what people call it. I invited her in for lemonade. We sat at the table while the late sun stretched across the linoleum. She said her mom had left when she was 10, that her dad's new girlfriend was younger than his daughter, that she hated the way women got erased like we're just furniture until someone prettier walks in. I listened. I nodded. I told her she wasn't crazy. When she left, she hugged me. That night, I lit a candle and sat on the porch, watching moths bat themselves against the screen. I thought of all the things I had been wife, hostess, helper, secret keeper, and how none of them had truly held me. Now, I was something else, not healed, not whole, but honest. That was enough. The story never really ended, of course. People still talk. There are jokes. There are memes. I hear whispers when I buy tomatoes at the co-op or sit in the library thumbing through gardening books. But I don't mind, because the worst thing that ever happened to me became the reason I finally walked away. Not from him, from who I'd become beside him. And every day I wake up in that quiet house with no one expecting me to play small. I feel like I've returned to the world on my own terms. He took years from me, but I took the ending and made it mine. Fall settled in like a long exhale. Leaves began to crisp at the edges. The wind had more to say. Every morning I woke to the sound of something soft tapping against the window, not loud enough to startle me but persistent. A reminder that time moves even when you think your life has frozen in place. I started growing herbs in small pots along the kitchen sill. Basil, thyme, and a stubborn little rosemary that refused to flourish until I moved it out of direct sun. I liked watching things grow, liked knowing that not everything needed to be fast or impressive. Some things just needed care and space. A month after I moved, I got a letter. A real one, ink on paper, my name written in slanted familiar handwriting that used to sign birthday cards and contractor checks and grocery lists left on the fridge. Eleanor. That's all it said on the envelope. Not Ellie. Not Han. Just my full name, like he was trying to remember how to be formal with me again. I opened it on the porch. The letter was 2 pages. Lined paper. No return address. Eleanor. I've gone over 100 different ways to say this, and none of them feel right. But I owe it to you to try. I was wrong. I was lazy. I let something rot that I should have fought for. I lied. I betrayed you. I humiliated you publicly, painfully, and I know sorry isn't enough. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. Not just what I did, but what I ruined. You gave me everything, and I treated it like convenience. I hope you're somewhere quiet, somewhere green. I hope the nights don't feel too long. I hope you still sing along with the radio and leave the bedroom window cracked when it rains. I'm sorry. Gee, I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it in half and placed it inside a cookbook I hadn't opened in years. Southern Living Simple Suppers. Page 143. The recipe for rosemary chicken. And I left it there. I didn't call him. I didn't write back. Because it wasn't that I didn't believe him. I think I did. At least in that moment, scribbling with regret and memory. But something in me had changed. Not just hardened, changed. Regret is a flashlight. It shows you where you've been, what you broke. But it doesn't rebuild anything. It doesn't unburn the house. He was allowed to be sorry. I was allowed to be gone. One weekend I drove to the coast alone, stayed in a quiet rental with sea glass tiles in the shower and a worn paperback of To the Lighthouse on the nightstand. I walked barefoot in the sand, let the wind tear through my sweater, let the ocean speak in its old, slow tongue. There I thought about what came next. Not who I would love, that didn't matter. Not then. But what I would love. I loved waking early without answering to anyone. I loved scrambled eggs on toast eaten on the front step. I loved the way rain smelled on my driveway and the way my breath fogged the glass when I leaned over my sketch pad too long. I started painting again. Not just sketching, but real wet, messy painting. I bought cheap canvases from the craft store and filled them with color. One day I painted a woman standing in a motel doorway, not ashamed, not afraid. just done. Another time I painted a field of lavender. I hung that one in the kitchen. That winter I was invited to speak at a small women's circle in town. A friend of a friend had told them my story, or at least the bones of it, and they wanted me to come. I said no, at first, but something kept tugging. Not vanity, not vindication, just a quiet desire to name the thing, out loud, in a room of women who might have forgotten how to use their own names. So I went. There were 12 of them, most my age, a few older. Some wore wedding rings, some didn't. They asked how I knew, how I kept quiet, how I carried it without screaming. I didn't have good answers, but I told them the truth, that I stayed too long, that I gave too much, that silence isn't always noble, sometimes it's just survival in disguise. And I told them about the glue. There was laughter. One woman clapped. Another said, "That's not revenge. That's poetry." But I corrected her. "No," I said. "That was grief. In disguise. Because that's what it really was. Not triumph. Not malice. Just the closing chapter of something I'd poured my life into. People think pain is always loud. That you have to scream or slam doors or burn things to make your suffering real. But the worst kind of pain is quiet. The kind that comes when you realize you could scream into the wind for 1,000 years and no one would come looking. That's what my marriage became. A long echo with no return until I made it stop. And in the absence of that echo, something else emerged me, uncollapsed, undefended, unfinished maybe, but finally awake. The first time I laughed, really laughed after it all, I was watching an old black and white movie on a Sunday afternoon. It wasn't even a funny scene, just some dry, clever line about a woman who'd rather be widowed than married to an idiot. But it hit me in the ribs like a tickle from childhood, and before I knew it, I was doubled over on the couch, hand over my stomach, laughing so hard I had to wipe tears from my face. It surprised me. The sound of it, the way it filled the room like a forgotten melody. Grief is greedy. It takes more than you think it will. It doesn't just take the person or the trust or the years, it takes your appetite. Your music, your voice, even your laughter. But that afternoon, something gave it back. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the knowing that I had survived something, that I hadn't just outlived a betrayal, I had outgrown it. And that's the thing no one tells you. Outgrowing someone is the most final kind of leaving there is. When you stop needing their apology, when you stop replaying the scene in your head, when you stop crafting the perfect last word in the shower, that's when it's done. And I was done. It wasn't that I didn't think about him. Of course I did. There were moments, mornings when I'd reach for a second mug by habit, grocery runs where I'd still pause by the peanut butter he liked, silence that used to be filled with someone else's breathing. But those moments stopped feeling like losses. They started feeling like openings. Space I could now fill with my own voice, my own patterns, my own life. One Thursday in December, I found myself standing outside the courthouse, the final papers in a manila envelope under my arm, and it started to snow. Big flakes, soft as feathers. They landed in my hair, clung to my lashes. I stood there blinking into the white and realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not relief, not triumph. Just a quiet return to self. I walked to a diner nearby, sat at the counter, ordered a slice of lemon meringue pie and black coffee. The waitress called me sweetheart and refilled my cup without asking. I looked around at the other people, a man eating eggs alone, a couple bickering gently over the crossword, two teenagers laughing with syrup on their fingers, and I realized I didn't envy anyone. For the first time in decades, I didn't want anyone else's life. I wanted mine. That winter, I painted more. One piece was just blue, all shades of it. Deep cobalt at the top, soft turquoise near the center, pale, misty blue at the edges. I didn't name it. Just hung it in my hallway where the light hit it at noon. It looked different every hour, like it was still changing its mind. People started asking to buy my work. I said no. They weren't for sale. They were mine. One day in February, I went to the hardware store for mulch and ran into his brother Mark. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. He looked tired, older, like someone who had seen too much and slept too little. "Ellie," he said, surprised. "Hi, Mark." A long pause. "You look good," he said finally. "Healthy." I smiled. He nodded, hands deep in his coat pockets. "He's not." I waited. Mark glanced around, lowered his voice. "He's drinking again. Lost the house. Lost his license last month." I didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know he brought it on himself, but..." I touched his arm. "You don't owe me an apology for his choices." Another pause. Then he looked at me, eyes glassy, and said, "You really loved him, didn't you?" I thought about that. About all the ways I'd bent myself to fit his needs. The meals, the silences, the forgiving, the forgetting. The years I traded for loyalty, thinking it would eventually buy me something back. "I don't know if that's what love was," I said. "But yes." "I loved him." Mark nodded, then whispered, "He loved you too. He just didn't know how, and that somehow made me feel sadder than anything else, because I think it might have been true. But love, real love, requires awareness, requires choosing, requires seeing the person across from you day after day and not turning away. He didn't do that, and I couldn't keep doing it for both of us. After that day, I stopped wondering how he was. Whatever mess he made of his life, it was no longer mine to clean. I had a life now, small, quiet, honest. I painted. I planted. I wrote letters I never sent. I started a notebook with all the things I used to forget. I loved strong tea, rainy windows, bare feet on wood floors, Nina Simone on vinyl, the feeling of dirt under my nails after pruning a stubborn root. None of it grand, but all of it real. And I think that's what healing actually is. Not some explosive reclaiming, not some Instagrammable before and after. Just the slow, stubborn rebuilding of your inner world, brick by brick, choice by choice. Until one day you look around and realize this life, this soft, beautiful, quiet life is mine again, and no one gets to take it from me. There was one moment, just one, when I almost called him. It was spring by then. The cherry trees along my street had burst into soft pink explosions, and every morning I'd sweep fallen petals off my porch like I was brushing remnants of another world away. The air had that tentative warmth, the kind that makes you believe in starting over. I'd just come in from the garden, hands dirty, a smudge of soil across my cheek I hadn't noticed yet. The phone rang, the landline, not my cell. No one ever called that number except the occasional telemarketer or dentist reminder. But that day, the sound made my heart pause. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. Hello. Silence. Then the faintest breath. I knew it was him. Not from the sound, but from the weight of it, the way it pressed through the line like a ghost that didn't know how to speak. "Gerald," I said quietly. Another breath. Then a click. He hung up. I stood there, the receiver still warm against my ear, and for just a second, not even a full heartbeat, I imagined dialing back. I imagined asking how he was. If he was eating, if he was sleeping, if he'd gotten the help he needed. But then I saw the dirt on my hands. I looked down at my fingernails caked with life, with growth, with something real, and I remembered something my therapist once said years ago: closure doesn't always look like conversation. Sometimes it looks like silence that you chose. So I didn't call him. I went back outside and planted foxglove along the east fence. Poisonous if mishandled, beautiful if respected. It felt appropriate. That summer, I turned 62. I didn't throw a party. I didn't tell anyone. I woke up early, made myself a stack of blueberry pancakes, and ate them on the back step with a glass of champagne and a notebook in my lap. I wrote down 10 things I wanted before I died. They weren't grand. Walk the cliffs in Big Sur. Learn to play the cello. Paint a woman in mid-laugh. Ride in a convertible with the top down and my arms in the air. Get a tattoo. Something small. Maybe a foxglove. Have dinner with someone who listens more than they talk. Swim at night. And forgive my younger self for not knowing better. Own nothing I don't love. Be remembered as someone who told the truth. I didn't write his name once. Not even in the margins. Later that week, I was invited to speak again, this time at a nearby community center, hosting a workshop called Women Who Stayed Too Long. The title made me laugh, but the room took my breath. Dozens of women, some my age, some older. A few young already blinking their way through betrayal. They sat in folding chairs with tissues in their hands, waiting for something they hadn't dared say aloud. When I stepped up to the front, I didn't talk about the glue. I talked about loneliness, about how it's possible to be married and still feel like you've vanished. I talked about invisibility, about making dinner every night for someone who doesn't ask how your day was, about folding his laundry and feeling like the maid, the mother, the mute. One woman wept into her palms when I said, "He never raised his voice." But silence can bruise too. Afterward, she hugged me. Said, "You made me feel less crazy." I told her she was never crazy, just unheard. I drove home in the dark with the windows down. The air smelled like honeysuckle and asphalt. I cried the whole way, not from sadness, from relief. Because after all those years of being quiet, I was finally speaking the truth, not out of anger, but out of recognition. And the truth was this: I had loved a man who wasn't capable of seeing me. I had stayed because I thought love was endurance. I had betrayed myself before he ever betrayed me. But I'd come back, not as the woman I used to be, but as someone new, someone who didn't flinch at being alone, someone who laughed at her own jokes, someone who filled her house with lavender and lemons and didn't ask for permission. That was the real revenge, not the glue, not the motel, but me still here, still blooming, still hers. It happened at the farmer's market, a place I'd gone every Saturday for months, where the old woman who sold honey knew my name, where the boy at the tomato stall flirted with every woman over 40, where the air always smelled like sage and baked bread. That morning, I had just picked out a bunch of sunflowers and was turning to leave when I saw her, the woman from the motel. Her hair was shorter now, dyed darker, chin length, parted clean down the middle like someone trying to reinvent themselves. She wore sunglasses too large for her face, but I recognized the walk. Quick, twitchy, like she was always a little late for something. She was standing near the citrus stand inspecting a blood orange. Alone. No Gerald. My body froze, but my mind didn't. My mind had already leapt back to that motel room, that police tape, that scream echoing down the street. She hadn't seen me. I could have left. Just walked past. Slipped through the rows of booths like a ghost. But something rooted me there. Not rage. Not even curiosity. Just this slow rising urge to look at her. To see finally what I hadn't allowed myself to see up close, the woman he had chosen. She looked ordinary, not cruel, not young enough to be scandalous, not pretty enough to resent, just regular, human. When she reached for a lemon, her sleeve pulled back slightly, and I saw the tiny tattoo on her wrist. A paper airplane. It made my stomach twist, not from jealousy, but from recognition. Because years ago, I had told Gerald that if I ever got a tattoo, it would be a paper airplane, a symbol of childhood, of folding something small and watching it carry your hopes farther than you thought possible. I had told him that in a moment of intimacy under candlelight with his head resting on my chest. And now here, it was inked on someone else's body. I didn't know if he'd told her the story, if he'd shared the memory as his own, if she had any idea what she was carrying around on her skin. But I knew one thing: he had given her a piece of me, and she didn't even know it. I turned to go, hands trembling around the bouquet, but then I heard her voice. "Oh, sorry." She had bumped into someone, the honey vendor, I think, and her sunglasses slipped a little. She caught my eye. Just for a second. I saw it flicker across her face, recognition. Not immediate, but slow and sharp, like the burn of a match when it touches skin. Her lips parted. She stepped forward. "Are you—" I shook my head once, just enough to stop her. She froze. We stood there for what felt like hours, surrounded by strangers choosing peaches and chasing toddlers. No one looked at us. We were invisible again, two women trapped inside the echo of the same man. She opened her mouth again, but I beat her to it. "Don't." I said it quietly. No anger, no edge, just a line in the dirt neither of us needed to cross. She blinked, then nodded. She turned, walked away. I stood there for a long time, my hands still holding the sunflowers, my breath catching in my throat like a laugh that couldn't quite come out. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't closure. It was a moment strange and quiet and holy, where I saw the last bit of him walk away inside someone else's shadow, and I didn't want him back. I didn't want to know where he was, or how he was living, or if he still told stories that weren't his to tell. He had passed through me, through both of us, and left a trail of ash and paper airplanes behind. But I had rebuilt. I walked home that morning, sunflowers in hand, and placed them in the blue ceramic vase I'd found at a thrift store the week after the divorce. I brewed tea, sat on the back porch, watched a bird tug string from my old patio cushion and disappear into the hedge. And I felt it, that slow, unmistakable lift inside me. Not joy exactly, but room. The kind of room that means something new is finally coming. That afternoon I painted. I didn't plan to. It just happened. A wide canvas, shades of red and cream and shadow. I painted the back of a woman walking down a hallway toward a door that was slightly ajar. You couldn't see her face, just her bare feet, her spine, her hand just starting to reach. The light on the other side was warm. I didn't sign the painting, didn't name it either. But when I stepped back, I felt a sudden rush of breath rise through my chest. I was no longer trying to say something to him. I was trying to say something to me. The sky broke open the day I let go of the last of him. Not in some metaphorical, poetic sense, I mean literally. A thunderstorm cracked through the valley just after dawn, scattering petals from my neighbor's plum tree and soaking the earth in minutes. I stood at the window in my robe, coffee warm in my hand, watching the rain move like a curtain across my garden. It was the anniversary, not of the marriage, not of the motel, but of something stranger the day I stopped waiting to be chosen. A year to the day since I placed the bottle in his overnight bag. A quiet act. Surgical. Not born of rage, but of grief sharpened into clarity. And now here I was whole. Not healed in the hallmark sense, not washed clean or transformed into some shining, untouchable woman. No. I still had scars. I still had questions. I still had days when the silence felt like a thud in the chest. But I had myself, and that was more than I'd had in decades. I spent the morning organizing my art supplies, lining the brushes, refilling the charcoal tins, sorting scraps of canvas and old ink. I found a sketch I had forgotten, a rough outline of a woman sitting at a table, head tilted, eyes closed like she'd just heard her own name spoken kindly. It undid me, not because I'd forgotten how to draw, but because I'd forgotten how to recognize myself in the things I made. That afternoon, I sat down and began a letter. Not to him, not to her, but to the version of me who had stayed too long. Dear Eleanor, you did not fail. You were not stupid or naive or blind. You loved with both hands. You showed up. You endured. You gave. You hoped. That doesn't make you foolish. That makes you faithful. And now your faith belongs to you. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are here, still breathing, still becoming, still worthy of joy. Go outside. The world is blooming again. E. I folded it gently and tucked it into the back of my journal. Later, I walked to the edge of my garden barefoot. The soil was damp. The air smelled like turned earth and lilac. I stood there, eyes closed, listening to the world drip and breathe. And I remembered something my grandmother once told me, standing in her kitchen, elbow deep in biscuit dough. It's not the men that make or break you, Ellie. It's what you do with the silence they leave behind. I had turned my silence into a sanctuary. I no longer needed a witness to my worth. I was the one watching, and somewhere out there I knew people were still laughing about it. The motel, the glue, the punchline of it all. Maybe it would never stop being funny to them. Maybe I'd always be that woman. But let them laugh. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't know how quiet a betrayal could be, how invisible a woman could become, how long you could sleepwalk through a marriage before one day your fingers wrapped around the doorknob and you realized this house is no longer mine. They didn't know what it took to stay, and they sure as hell didn't know what it took to leave. Only I knew that. Only I carried the full weight of it and the quiet, startling relief that came after. That night I sat on my porch in the dark, wrapped in a sweater, sipping tea. The stars were faint behind the cloud line, but I could still feel them, that distant pull of something ancient, luminous, unreachable. And for the first time in years, I felt like part of the world again. Not as a wife, not as a woman scorned, but simply as myself. Enough. The garden is blooming again. It started with the lavender, always the first to push through. Then came the foxglove, defiant and vivid, followed by soft curls of thyme at the corners of the stone path. Even the stubborn rosemary, which almost didn't make it through the frost, surprised me with its resilience. I'd almost pulled it up in February. I'm glad I didn't. I sit out there most mornings now, wrapped in an old cardigan, a chipped mug of tea warming my hands. I don't bring my phone. I don't wear a watch. I don't plan what I'll do next. I just sit, breathe, watch. I've learned to let stillness hold me instead of fearing it. There are birds again. I can name them now: house finch, mourning dove, Carolina wren. They land on the feeder and hop like they own the place. I don't mind. I like the company. My hands are stronger than they used to be. Not softer, stronger. From the pruning and the painting and the refusing to flinch. They don't shake anymore when I hold a brush or when I reach for something I want. I finished the painting of the woman at the open door. I added a strand of gray in her hair, a shadow of something golden across her shoulder light from another room. She's walking into it now. You can't see where it leads. But it's warm. She's smiling. I hung it by the front door. Every time I leave the house, I pass it. Not to remember what happened, but to remember who I became. The story faded as they always do. New gossip took its place. The motel repainted the room, changed the locks, posted a sign that said, "We respect your privacy." Funny in a way. I got a card in the mail 2 weeks ago. No return address. Just one line inside, written in blue ink. Thank you for setting me free too. No name, no signature. I placed it in my notebook next to the list of things I still want to do. It doesn't matter who sent it. It's not about them. It's about me. Some days are still quiet in the wrong way. The old ache creeps in. The questions, the what-ifs. I let them visit. I make them tea, and when they've said their piece, I send them back out into the garden. I no longer confuse closure with forgetting. I remember everything, but memory no longer controls me. It just walks beside me. Sometimes when I pass strangers, I wonder if they know, if they remember the headlines, the whispers, the woman with the glue. Maybe they do, but it doesn't sting anymore. Because I am no longer the punchline. I am the after, the woman who stayed too long and then left without asking permission. The woman who was erased and rewrote herself from scratch. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.